Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara, Daf Lamed Daled. We're starting at the second of the wide lines, most of the way down on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. We are in the middle of a conversation about kalim that belong to Ovdei Kochavim that are then going to be used by a Jew with concerns of Yain Nesech. Yesterday we spoke about the possibility of rinsing things out 3 times. We're going to be discussing that a little bit more. Today, there's a piece of a Gemara today that is the base for a fascinating psak of koshering a dishwasher according to some poskim, which is not a pashut zach. We'll get there in a few minutes. Let's get started. Second of the wide lines, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. The Gemara says, "Kase, what about the cups of an akum? Ravasi asar, Ravashi shari." Ravasi wasn't letting it happen. Or Ravashi said, "No problem." If the first time the cup was used, it was used by a goy. Remember, we said that their cups, their first couple of uses, they would absorb a lot of liquid. So there, if the first time it was used was by an akum kuleamalo pligi de usr, because it will have absorbed that larger amount of liquid in the walls. Ki pligi b'pam sheni. The only question is if the yid used it first, or if a non-yain nesach drink was first and then the wine. Kipligi b'pam sheni. And ikad amri, the pam rishon v'sheni, not just the first time. The second version is that pam rishon v'sheni, both of them kuli amalo pligi de aser, that if a goy were to have used it for wine in the first 2 drinks, that's when it would definitely be aser kipligi b'pam gimel the third time. So these are just machlokos about how much we assume is absorbed in the walls the first 1 or 2 times. V'hilchasa, how do we paskin in halacha? This is quoted in the Shulchan Aruch as well, in the Tur. Pam rishon v'sheni aser gimel mutar. That if we have a kli that's absorptive, then if the guy uses it for wine, we assume that if he uses it in either of the first 2 uses of the cup, then that's going to be problematic. Gimel mutar. And if he uses it the third time and then the Jew takes it back, that would be permissible. Says the Gemara, Amar of Zvid, Hai money de kunya. This is talking about a kli that's lined with kunya, that's lined with lead. We always talked about, having lead in the water, and we always joked that people ate lead paint chips, as a child. This Gemara said they mamish made their drinks this way. They were none the wiser. They probably weren't aware of the impact of lead. Even our pencils are not made out of lead, even when we were kids. At least when I was a kid, it wasn't made out of lead. It was made out of graphite or some other material. Lamaisa, it's not such a good thing. So if you are using this type of lined lead cup, if it's chivra ve'okma shari, if the lining was black or white, then it's mutter. However, Yuroka Asr Mishum Mitzvah, if the color was green, that was problematic, indicated that it had a mixture of something else in it, and that it therefore was more absorbent and therefore more problematic. The isbahu kartufni, if there were cracks, kulu asiri, then we don't care what type of lining there was. Pashut, if there are cracks in it, it's obvious that the kli itself is going to absorb, and therefore it would be problematic. The Gemara says, Darash Meremar. Meremar says, Kunya, these types of kalim that are lined with lead, Bein Ukma, Bein Chibra, Bein Yeroka Shari, all 3 of them are mutter. That's what the Gemara says. Why is our case different than chametz on Pesach? What is this talking about? So the Gemara is going to present a contrast between our world, where we were talking about the lead-lined kalim that were used by goyim, and the case of Pesach. Let's see what the Pesach case is. We're 4 lines from the bottom on Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. The question was asked of Meremar, these lead-lined kalim, are we allowed to use them on Pesach? If they were used year-round, are we allowed to use them on Pesach? We're super strict about this. We have a chumrah quoted in Shulchan Aruch, not even using glass that doesn't even absorb anything. And really, our glass is such high quality, it really doesn't absorb anything at all. I remember Rabbi Yaakov Neuberger from YU, when I was there, he was talking about what Pyrex is made out of. Is Pyrex regular glass? Or is Pyrex a glass that has additives? And he said it's actually taka, it has its additives to it. It's not pure glass that's usually made from silicone or sand or something like that. So his shaila was, is there an obligation to do tevilas kelim if you buy new Pyrex? Because really glass is a din derabanan, metal is a more formal din. And he held that you still do make a bracha on tevilas keilim, even if it's Pyrex, even though they have additives in it, but it's not regular glass. It's very, very difficult. I think I've managed over the years to break them, but it's very difficult to break Pyrex. What's that? It can be done. It's not regular, right? It doesn't shatter like glass. I haven't seen it in a while, but it can break anyway. Just interesting, like when you talk about like applying to modern day technologies, we have all of these different chemicals now. The linings of some of our pans, they're temperature resistant to 500-600 degrees. You can scramble eggs on them, and the lining will never scratch off. No such thing. But we have a lot of technology. So because when that happens, we then have to pose some halachic questions. What is the applicability of any of these utensils to any of our modern day utensils? Almost zero. Literally almost zero. Almost every cup we have barely absorbs, if at all. Rabbi Chaim Twersky, when I was in high school, well, I should say, I think he told me while I was in high school. If not, it was right after. He's brilliant, Rabbi Chaim Twersky. He did a science test. He got a bunch of chemicals. You would have loved this. Dad, you would have loved this. He got chemicals, and he was testing whether or not our silverware actually has blios. Halachically, if I take my fleshik fork and I stick it in boiling hot macaroni, we assume halacha l'maisa that there are blios, that there were some absorptions into the metal. Needless to say, our metal is so much more high quality that they absorbed zero. Nothing. They absorbed zero. And I don't know what he did. He told me that his house smelled like chemicals. That was how he framed the case. But he said he tested them, and our kalim don't really have it. So Rav Hershel Schechter from YU is makel on a lot of the blios cases with our modern utensils because they mamish don't absorb anything. It doesn't mean you can be makel without asking your Rav. You should follow your Masorah. The Hershel Schechter used to say, if you like my kulas, you have to also like my chumras. So if you want to just start following things like you're shopping around, it's a bad idea because the Rav had a lot of chumras too. So he makes tea in a klisheni on Shabbos because he holds the tea as tavlin. That's great. But you also have to hold of all the chumras and learn of everything. So I'm not trying to show anyone heterim that they should chase. I'm just highlighting that there are some unique heterim in regards to blios because the maisa, our kelim really don't have blios. It changes so many things in Piskei Halacha if you say that there are no blios. So yeah, okay. So,
scientific scale and check the difference between a new pot and a used pot, and there is, a regular scale can't sense it. But
yeah, you're saying to multiple decimal points.
More.
Yeah, a metal pot. This wasn't me. This was a metal pot. This was a metal pot.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. When we were learning Hilchos Shabbos in Grus, Rabbi Asaf Bednarsh brought in his cholent pot that had cracked, like the ceramic part, and it cracked pretty nicely. And at the bottom of the pot, in the cross section of the pot, you can see cholent absorption into the porcelain or whatever material. Yeah, that was real blios, and that's lined with an enamel of some kind. That's already the heat, the constant heat, the heating elements at the bottom, and it just did draw it in. But with metal, again, I'm not questioning that comment, but yeah, no, but he had tested, right.
That was also for silverware, which is not as hot or as used as consistent.
Gam, you use it very, very briefly without. That's a very good point. Very good. Maybe his heterim only applied to silverware. Could be. Okay, so says the Gemara, are we allowed to use these lead-lined kalim that had been used during the year? Can we use them on Pesach? Uroka, the green one, which remember we said is the one that's kind of a mixture of materials and therefore is more absorbent. Lo tibaylach. The mitzarfe, it has other additives to it. Ubale ve'asiri pashat that it absorbs, and that would definitely be asir. Ki tibaylach, where is the shaila asked about whether or not we can use lead-lined kalim? That's chivri v'umki if they're white or if they're black. What would the halacha be? Ki isbuhu kartufni, when there are cracks in the lead lining, pashat, that's going to be problematic. Loti bailach devadai bali v'asiri pashat, that if they absorb, they're going to be asir because there's cracks in them. That's obvious. That's why the poskim say, like, if you have knives that have that are not like a one-piece metal knife. Most of our knives have a handle and then a separate blade. It came out impossible they're very hard to clean because everything gets stuck up in where the plastic meets the blade, stuff gets stuck in the screws. They're very hard to kosher. Can be done. It's just sometimes the poskim are pretty makbid on that. Also, the handles are plastic. So plastic absorbs. Plastic is more problematic. So anyways, the shilas are not in any of those cases. Kiti bailach, the shi'i, when it's very smooth on the inside. So again, the shila is where the lining is black lead or white lead without cracks, and instead it's very smooth. My wo da halacha bi. Amar lahu. So he says to them, and we're on the top of Lamed Daled, Rav Ana Chazina lahu dimidaisi. I saw that the Kalim word dimidaisi. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi, the first Rashi on the page, dimidaisi, mizian dipnehem mibachut machmas bli osan. I saw the face of the kli, meaning the outside of the kli, sweating or dripping, zeah sweat. So when it was being cooked, the blios went through the lead, through the wall of the pottery, and oozed out the outside, which means v'kevan dimidaisi, vadai bali v'asiri. He held that these were going to be aser on Pesach, that clearly whatever lead there was, even the best of the lead, the whites and the blacks, it still absorbs, and it would be problematic. So says the Gemara, my taima, what is the reason for this? HaTorah he'ida al kli cheres she'enu yotze midei dofno le'olam. The Torah testifies that when cheres absorbs something, it never ever fully exits the kli. Once it's in, an element, an aspect of it is always trapped. What does it mean? HaTorah he'ida. Rashi says on the second line of Rashi, Dibra Maschal, Torah he'ida dechsiv. The pasuk says that when it comes to a kli cheres that was cooked, yishaver, that it needs to be broken. De'ein lo tara elo shvira. You got to break it back down all the way to the basics, and that is how you kasher. So asks the Gemara, it articulates its question. On the bottom of the page, we saw the Mekel Shita, that whether it was Chivri, Umki, Yeroka, it didn't matter, they were all mutter. That was fine, coming from Ovdei Kochavim, no problem at all. But when it comes to Pesach, we're makbid. So why the distinction? Why are we more Mekel by Avodah Zara? Don't we have an Isser Hana by both? Right? We're makbid gomer on chametz. We're makbid gomer on yain nesech. So how can we have a distinction? Why is it that we're mekel by avodah zara? So says the Gemara, v'chi tema chametz deoraisa, and yain nesech is derabanan. If you want to argue that there is a fundamental difference between the two isurim, that chametz shteit and chumash, but yain nesech is a gzeira derabanan and isur derabanan based on the fact that we're concerned about yain nesech. So maybe, but the problem is that can't be, because called the tikkun rabbanan kein deoraisa tikkun. The chachamim modeled isur derabanan after dinei deoraisa. It wasn't this like loosey-goosey, like, no, we modeled them after Din Doraisa. So whatever should have been true by Pesach, because it's a Din Doraisa, should also be true by Avodah Zarah, which is that it should have been Kein Doraisa Tikkun. They should have had the same restrictions. So how could Mareimar say that by Avodah Zarah it's Mamish Mutter, Chivra Ukmi, and Yeroka, no matter what color the lead is? Especially the Mekel one, especially the green one that absorbs a lot. How can he be Mekel? So says the Gemara, and this is such an important principle in regards to kashrus, is temperature. Ze tashmisho bechamin. When we're talking about Pesach, we're talking about something that absorbs with heat. Ze tashmisho betzonein. But when it comes to avodah zarah, to yain nesech, that's cold. And because the use of wine is typically cold, therefore we're not concerned. So let's just step back out of the weeds and think about this again. We have two case scenarios. We have one where we have a kli that's lined with lead, either white, black, or green, lenient by avodah zarah. Why are we lenient? Because it's cold. So even if the cheres would normally have absorbed, but the cold, the lining of lead works perfectly. Therefore, nothing is going to absorb. Therefore, we can be mekel by yayin nesech, by something that's been used for yayin nesech in a lead kli. Masha enkin in regards to chametz, we have the same kli. It's still pottery lined with lead. It's either black, white, or green. But we are machmir because of temperature. And this is always going to be one of the shilas when you call a rav and you say, I put my fork in the milk in the fleshik drawer. It's a milk. I find this all the time where I have a fork that's in the wrong drawer. So there we have a lot of leniencies. Whoever washed it, hopefully use soap. It depends who washes it. But if it's an adult, then there's soap. So that's a big kula. That's why if you put any dish in a dishwasher, by accident, we're going to be mekel on that dish because granted hot, but there's soap. But if there's no soap, which is a pogam, if there's no soap, but there is heat, then you really have a huge problem. And not every case scenario is fixable. So I've done this before where I've stirred boiling hot macaroni and cheese with a fleshik spoon. So that's very problematic. How do you kosher that? You have to clean it off with cold water and soap, wait 24 hours to get it out of the ben yomo phase, because we assume that any blios that exit during the first 24 hours is tam l'shvach, right? It's a good flavor, but after 24 hours, it's a bad flavor. So then you have to put it to hagala, and the water has to be 60 times the size, the volume of the spoon, not just the contact part. We assume the whole spoon is a blia, just to be machmer. Anyways, temperature is a big deal when it comes to kashrus. There are some exceptions with kavush and some other, but in general, we are most concerned about kashrus issues when there's temperature. Another exception. You can definitely eat the macaroni as long as the spoon before it was put in hadn't been used for flesh within 24 hours. You ruined the spoon. The spoon is treif until further notice. But the food that you're eating is completely mutter. Completely mutter. Again, provided that the spoon hadn't been used for hot fleshiks within 20. It's usually the case. Usually we don't. It could be otherwise. But if you're taking it out of the drawer, it probably hasn't been used in 20. I don't know how your house runs. I just know how my house runs. And if it had been that it was fleshik and used within 24 hours, then you'd have to take off kedei klipa, the whole area that contacted the spoon. You'd have to remove it and toss it. So it's a very thin layer. We would just take a whole big clod and throw it in the garbage, and then you're back to where you started. One more exception while we're talking is davar charif, is that if you cut something fleshik with a milchik knife, and that fleshik thing is a fleshik onion, an onion that's in meat, whatever, but not uncooked. So that also davar charif rekindles whatever's in the knife, and that's very problematic also. Okay, let's continue. Rabbi Akiva ikla leginzak. Rabbi Akiva went to the city of Ginzak. Ba'umine, they asked him a few questions, some of which have nothing to do with our sugya whatsoever. We're about a third of the way down on Lamed Dal and Aleph. Mis'anin l'shos, let's say a person does intermittent fasting, all of a sudden it's noon, it's 1 o'clock, it's 2 o'clock, he hasn't touched any food yet the whole day. Do we say mis'anin l'shos, now that he's already so far into the day, can he say midway through his intermittent fasting, you know what, I'm just going to fast today? Is that considered a real halachic tainus? Oh, ein mis'anin l'shos, or no, do we not say that a person can choose that their fast will start within the middle of the day? Lo hava biyodei, Rabbi Akiva didn't know the answer.
Like I used to say that special thing before mincha the previous day.
Usually, correct. Would we say that? So yes, that's what we would typically do. So here, Rashi even says this. Would you say kigon shekibil olav tainis mishay sha'os l'mala? It's noon, and then he decides he wants to fast. Can you be makabel at that point to do a fast? No kavana in the first 6 hours of the day. So does that work? No answer yet. Case 2, kankanim shel ovdei kochavim. Obviously, this is our case. The containers of ovdei kochavim, asur no mutar and lo hava biyada. He didn't know the answer to that either. Bamesh shimesh Moshe kol shivas yemei milum. We know that Moshe kind of functioned in a Kohen-esque type of role during the shivas yemei milum. What begadim did he wear? Did he wear big day kahuna? He wasn't really a Kohen. He wasn't a Kohen at all. He was a Levi, but he wasn't a Kohen. So what did he wear? So it says the Gemara, lo hava biyadei. Rabbi Akiva didn't know. So asa shal bei medrash, went into the base medrash and he asked some shilas. Again, I don't know when this was in Rabbi Akiva's life that he didn't know these things, but it's interesting to hear him say, I don't know. Some of these things we just learned a few lines ago. So why didn't he know? We have to look in the Rishonim. So it says the Gemara Amre. First of all, hilchasa mis'anin l'shos. Aleph, you can start a tainus in the middle of the day. V'im hishlim, if in fact you agreed to complete the fast, then mispalo tfilas tainus. Then your mincha at that day is the tfilas tainus. Then your what?
Here brings.
Where are you?
Rabbi Akiva equal begins it.
Oh, yeah?
Here Rashi perkam the tiniest. Regards Mar Ukva. That's for
That's amazing. That's incredible. That's incredible.
But it's okay for Morocco not to know.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
No.
Let's give out. What's the rest of the Tosas? Od ki haylo letalmud lehavia b'lashon brisa. Mihu halokasha. That's ki hayalo l'talmud lahavia b'lashon
Right, it
brayso.
should, in other words, it becomes a Tana. It's brought as a story, not.
That
as
is
a brisa.
a gewaldic diuk.
Would seem, right?
We should have caught that one on our own. That the Tanya part that wasn't even in existence. That's incredible. Also, ikla leginzak ikla is that's that's like a
So in the end, he says that there are lots of stories that are brought.
right. That's true. Mazkir Ma'aser Rabbi Akiva v'Chaya. Incredible. Thank you for calling that. I didn't see that. As you can imagine, I didn't read most of the Tososim on this page. So thank you for highlighting that. Okay, so number one is you are allowed to do a fast in the middle of the day. Behilchas, another halacha is kankanim shalov de kochavim la'achar yud beis chodesh mutarim. After 12 months, it's mutar. B'mashe, it's mutar. This is where Rav Mordechai Willig from YU has a heter that if you clean out a dishwasher and you don't use it for 12 months, it is now whatever status you want. And it's drawn exactly from this line of the Gemara, which is as well quoted in the Rambam and in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoredeya, Kuf Lamed Hey. I will say that none of my Rabbeim held of this. Rav David Miller from Grus would not allow this. I believe most poskim are not lenient on this when it comes to dishwashers, especially because our dishwashers have a lot of nooks and crannies, and there's like a food reservoir at the bottom, which granted it's garbage, but there's still heat and there still is a transfer, even though there's soap. So it's a little messy. But I heard Rav Willig say this when I was in Grus. He came to give a shiur on this. I remember where I was standing when he said it. It's like one of these weird memories, like I remember where I was standing when he said it because I was totally shocked. Because then I went home and I told my mom. She's like, no. I'm like, okay. But this is where that heter comes from, is that if you do wait 12 months, and there probably are scenarios that are lemaisa where we would wait for it. There probably are, just dishwashers are complicated. What did he wear? B'chalak lava. He wore just white garments. Rav Kahana Masni b'chalak lava and she'ein bo imra. Not only did he wear a white one, but it had no imra. Rashi says imra safa. It didn't have a hem, just a regular white garment that was unhemmed. Okay, very good. Last of the short lines, hachar tzanim v'hazagim, the skins and the seeds shall ovdei kochavim v'chulei. Tanu rabbanon hachar tzanim v'hazagim shall ovdei kochavim. If they are lachin, if they're still moist, then they are asurim. Alt yain nesech. Yeveshim, if they've dried out, then mutarim, no problem. Hain inhu lachin v'hain inhu yeveshin. What an odd question. What's considered moist and what's considered dry? I would have said that which is moist, and that which is dry, which is a bit of a balabatish answer, and clearly that I'm wrong, because Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Lachin Kol Yud Beis Chodesh. We assume that the seeds, of course, the skins will dry out very quickly from grapes, but the seeds are considered to be Lachin Kol Yud Beis Chodesh, and the Yeveshim is La'achar Yud Beis Chodesh. The Ma'inaf Kamina, if you wanted to plant the seed, you're not allowed to have Hana. So l'chora, you're not allowed to plant the seed until the 12-month mark arrives, because it's Isser Hana. It's Marama Rabba Bar Barchanim Rav Yochanan Kshen Asur and Asur Nafilu Be'anak Kshen Mutar Nafilu Be'achila. Within the 12 months, they're completely Asur. After that, you can even eat it. No problem at all. What we're seeing over here in these past two Gemaras about Yud Beis Chodesh is that after 12 months pass, there's like a different entity. There's like something new. It's not the same anymore. Haraya is that there's a pure Isser Hana by Yain Nesach. Yet over here, once we hit the 12-month mark, this is that last line, is that Kshein Mutar Nafilu Be'achila. We move up 2 rungs. It's not just not Aser Be'ana, it's even Mutar Be'achila. So again, back to Rav Willig's Psak, there's something new happening after 12 months. Amar Rav Zvid, Hai Dur Dai, this is sediment. It's like the thick, icky parts of the grapes. Hai Dur Dai, the Chamra de Armoy of Armenian wine. Basar Tracer Yarche Shata Shari, after 12 months, it's completely mutter. Amar of Chaviva Bre de Rava Hai Gulfi. These barrels, Basar Tracer Yarche Shata, if there's nothing in them for 12 months, so then Shari, no problem at all. Amar of Chaviva Hani, these, as we turn to the top of Lamadal in the base. Av to the Tai, Rashi says, Avta chemas meor av. It's a container made out of thick leather. The korno so butin. So this avta detai, these thick leather bags of the Arab traveler, basar tracer yarche shata shari as well. Amaravacha breder ravika hani purtzani. Rashi says purtzani is psoles shelanovim. De armoi basar tracer yarche shata shari. And again, still more, Amaravacha breder ravahani gulfi. These barrels that are shchimi ve'ukmi, that are either red or black, basar tracer yarche shata shari. Again, what's the application to modern day? Good question. If we wanted to apply it by dishwashers, perhaps we could apply it to other utensils that we don't even have to do hagala. Let's say that I just don't use something for 12 months. I have dishes that we haven't used for 12 months. They're perfectly clean. They're ugly, or they are stuck in the back of the cabinet, or they're in the wrong cabinet. So we just never use them. So then what does that mean? So it depends on the material. But what we're seeing over here, the barrels, the leather, it seems like a lot of materials have this heter. Okay, so this is a really fascinating sugya that applies lemaisa to certain products.
In general, that bowl that's in the back of your closet that you haven't used in 12 months, do we paskin the halacha?
Probably it's in the Shulchan Aruch.
So
yeah. Okay, you have to ask on the material, on what the material is, and then you have to see if that applies to, if you can carry it over from the Gemara. So this first example, for example, is on the top of the page, is the avta decided leather. We don't use leather, but if we did use leather, let's say it as an example, let's say a person has a challah cover that's made out of leather. That does happen. And then someone pours chicken soup on it. You clean it off and you wait 12 months. Can you then use it at a milchik meal on Shavuos? Yes. Yes, you could based on this Gemara. So I'd be cautious about the applications. I'm not a posik, we're not posting, I'd be careful with the applications. But this din is in Shulchan Aruch, the 12-month din. The Hamurias, we're on Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, 5 lines down. Hamurias, we said this was considered to be a luxurious dish. It was where they expertly drew out the fats from fish, which is difficult because fish are pretty lean creatures. They spend their day moving like all day. You know, especially the more aggressive. If you've ever gone fishing, I've pulled in a salmon before, like a 20, 30-pound salmon. Oh my gosh, I weighed 8 times more than that thing. It almost pulled me in the water. They're so strong. They have fat on them because everybody has some fat on them, but they're really, really powerful and they have not a lot of fat. So it was a chachma. How do you get the fat out? So let's see how they did this. First of all, Tana Rabbanan Morias Uman Mutter. Morias that was made by an expert, no problem at all. Rashi, such an important Rashi in this sugya, Morias Uman, 3rd line. Morias Uman shel Oved Kochavim. He's a Goy D'Oraisa. He's an Oved Kochavim. Halacha l'maisa, we trust him because he's an Uman. Uman Omari Umrase, like we've spoken about. He's not going to ruin his profession. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel took it a step further. Omer, he says, Mishum Reb Chanina ben Gamliel, seeming, I guess they were brothers. I don't know exactly the history, but it looks like it from here. Af chilek uman mutter. What's chilek? Take a look at Rashi here, 8 lines down. Rashi says, chilek min dagim tahorim. It's a kosher fish. The Sultanis Shimon, their name was Sultanis. Uvekatnuso, in their younger years, when they were little small fish, ein los napir v'kaskeses. They didn't even have the basic features of what the Torah says in Parshas Shmini as to what is a kosher fish. V'asid legadil la'achar zman. And back in our Gemara, he says, even though some of the fish that are made with murias are chilek, they're fish that don't yet have fins and scales, even so, it's mutter to eat that fish. Af al pi, that the guy's an Oved Kochavim, it doesn't care about halacha 1 iota. It doesn't matter, because the way murias is made is with fish that, when they get older, have fins and scales. Sounds like a wild kula, but that's what the Gemara says. Tani Avimi Breder Rabbi Abo Murias Uman Mutter, same idea. And Avimi Breder Rabbi Abo, who Tani Lavu Amar La, he also has another comment. Pam Rishon Visheni Mutter. What's our scope of trusting this Oved Kochavim? So what they would do is they would take salt, take the fish, take salt, and the salt would draw out the fat from the fish to make the murias. So the first round, Rishon, Visheni, and the second round of adding salt to draw out the fats, mutter, we trust the akum. However, Shlishi asur, the third time we do the salting, that was much more of a difficult process because by the time you've done 2 rounds of salting the fish to get out the fish fats, there's very, very little left. The third round was difficult to execute, and if you did a bad job, the fish would smell bad. And my time, why is it? Who cares? Why don't we trust him? So it says the Gemara, my time, because Pam Rishon v'Sheni denafish shumnayu. With the first couple of times that the akum is going to salt the fish, there's nafish shumnayu. There's a lot of fat that's available. It's not hard to draw it out. Lo tzarach lemir me behu chamra. He won't be tempted to pour in a little bit of wine to get to the volume of morias that he would have wanted. Mikan va'elach, from the third salting and on, anything beyond that, ramu behu chamra. There we're going to be concerned that perhaps he added in wine to get to the volume of morias that he wanted. I'm a little bit fascinated by this because I'm just guessing. Fish fat and wine don't taste the same. So what kind of replacement was this? Nevertheless, the Gemara is concerned that the akum, again, with the third salting and beyond, would add wine in order to then serve it to people. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya b'dvaro. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, we'll be going to the 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom. Ahu arba, there was a boat, Timur Yasaf, and this was a boat that carried this very chashuv fish fat delicacy. And de'asi l'nemila de'ako, it had come to the port of Akko. Osi Rabbi Abba demin Akko, neture bahada. And what he did is he put shomrim, neture is a shomer, he would put a yid there to make sure that the goyim wouldn't add in any wine. Amar le Rabba Ata Idna Man Natra, who from the time it was made, who watched it. We have Chalav Yisrael, they had Morias Yisrael, they had to make sure, but there wasn't, it was only on the boat. So what'd you do before the boat? Like, why just the boat? Amar le Ad Idna, up until this point, up until the boat, Lamai Nechushla, should be Lamai, is the Girsa change. Lamai Nechushla, Imishum Dema'ar Bebechamra. If you want to say that we're concerned about the goy adding wine, which was what we were concerned about 5 lines ago, that doesn't apply in this case. Why are we not concerned about the goy adding wine? Because kista de murias beluma, one measure of murias was the cost of a luma, which was the currency in the city that it had come from. And kista de chamra bidalid lumi, and that measure, that same measure of wine was 4 luma. There is no way that guy is going to put in a liquid that's 4 times as expensive as the delicacy of murias. So I don't have to worry about that. But that was only true in that case. So then you have to know market value. Which one's more expensive? Is wine more? And in our culture, we'll say, which wine do you have? Do you have the bottles I bring to a bris? $4.79 a jewel. Kedem, 9% sweet. Perfect for what I need. Great for the baby. Great for me. Probably not great for anybody else. It's just regular wine, as my father has said in the past. These are wonderful 2024 grapes. They are not that aged. But you have to know, because if what we're saying is that we're concerned about adding wine, that's only true when the wine is an equivalent or cheaper price to the murias. Otherwise, no concern. Amarle Revirmi other Abzera Dilma. Maybe we should be concerned. I understand for the city that you're coming from, wine is dalid luma, and the murias is 1 luma for the same volume, but maybe, he says, Dilma Aidi de Tzur Asu, maybe he traveled and stopped by Tzur, the city of Tzur, on the way, to Shavi Chamra, where the murias and the Chamra were the same price, and therefore, maybe we should be concerned if they stopped in Tzur. Says the Gemara, you need to know your shipping routes. It's very difficult to dock a boat in Tzur at this time of year. Amarle Hasam by Tzur Ikule, which is a reference to the flowing of the water. The water's flowing away. It's difficult to get there. And ufshure ika, there's also the melting of snow caps in that particular locale, which made it very, very difficult to dock a boat at Tzur. And you're not just going to stop there on the way and then start trading in Morias. It wasn't easy to get off the boat or to get there. So that's not what we're concerned about. Our Mishnah had also spoken about cheese. We're going to talk about that until the end of our day today. The Gemara says, "Ugavinas beis unaiki." Amar of Shimon ben Lakish. Mipnei ma asru gavinas unaiki. Why is it that we were concerned about the cheese from unaiki? Let's remember how cheese was made back in the day. After an animal was killed, they would take out the stomach, and the stomach is shaped where there's the esophagus that goes down, the stomach widens, and then it tapers again as it leads to the intestines. So they would take that out of the body, they would pour milk in the middle, close the ends, and they would shake it. It would draw the rennet out of the stomach lining, and that would help the cheese to curdle, and that then would be the cheese that they would use. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Milk comes out of an udder, still milchak. The sugi of kal, we're going to get to Maseches Chulin later at the end of Chulin. Okay, we'll get to chulin at some point, I guess. So that's a whole sugya in Maseches chulin about chal, about how do you even possibly eat milk? How do you drink milk? It comes from meat that it sits in. Not only that, how can you eat the udder, which is flesh? So there, the Gemara is going to discuss that. We'll get there. We'll get there shortly. But over here, what we're talking about is that it's mutter to make cheese inside because remember, it's cold. It's extracting rennet from the, which is just an enzyme, and there's no other meat that's inside the milk that's inside the cheese. You're good to go, no problem. So then, what's the problem? Why can't we use the animals from Besu Nike in order to make cheese? Says the Gemara, because in Besu Nike, most of the agalam, most of the calves are used nishchatin, they're shechted le'avodas kochavim. That's a big problem. Now they are avodah zara and they're aser behana. Good. Asks the Gemara, my area rov agalam. Why did you say rov? Even a miut would be a problem. I feel miut nami to ha Rav Meir chayish miuta. Rav Meir throughout Shas, in most cases where this comes up, Rav Meir is of the opinion that we're choshesh for the miut. So if most of the animals are going to be shechted for avodas kochavim, so of course he would hold that that's problematic. He would even hold that it's problematic for the miut. So says the Gemara, because of the following. Iamris rov, if I say rov, then I know that ika miut, that miut is included in that. But if I say miut, then we have a problem. What's the problem of miut? Eli iamris miut, and we're halfway down. If we say the language of miut, so then we have two miutim, not one. First of all, kevan de ika rov agalim de'eni shchatin la'avodas kochavim. Most agalim, if you say miut, that means most agalim are not used for avodas kochavim. And v'ikanami she'ar behemos de'eni shchatin la'avodas kochavim. It's true of all other animals too. And that therefore leads to havalei miuta de miuta. We're talking about two groupings of animals, agalim, and according to Rav Meir, had we said miut, then that would imply that only a miut of agalim, and then a miut of all other animals is miuta de miuta, or miuta de miuta lo chayish Rav Meir. That's what like similar to the concept of a svek sveka, not exactly mirroring, but the same concept, where even Rav Meir is chayish de miuta is not chayish in a case of miuta de miuta. Amar le Reb Shimon bar Eliakim le Reb Shimon bar Lakish, ben Lakish, ki nishchaten la'avodas kochavim mahave. Who cares? Even if you want to say that egel, that calf that you're now using to make cheese was nishchat for avodah zara, that shouldn't be a problem. Why not? De itmar, because there's a brisa, there's a memra, a statement from Rav Shimon ben Lakish himself. Let's look at what Rav Shimon ben Lakish said. They asked Rav Shimon ben Lakish, how in the world can you say that there's a problem in the case of, even according to Rav Meir, in the case of miut or in the case of robe, it should be mutter. V'ha'atu deshari, you, Rav Shimon ben Lakish, were makil. Where were you makil? De itmar. The statement over here in the Memra says as follows: Hashochet es habehema. If somebody shechts an animal, let's just be clear. The shchita wasn't done l'shem avodas kochavim, but it was done lizro gedama la'avodas kochavim. The avoda of the avodah zara was zrikas hadam. So in a case scenario where the guy who's a bal avodah zara, their priest, he does the shchita, not l'shem avodah zara, but to get the blood, and the blood is l'shem avodah zara. So then, or lahat yerchel la'avodas kochavim, anything other than the shchita, either for the blood or to be makter the fats. Rav Yochanan Amar Asura. Why does Rav Yochanan hold it's Asura? The Gemara says, "Kosavar machshava me'avoda le'avoda," because we kind of do a transfer from one part of the avoda to another. We know halachically that there's shchita, there's holacha, there's kabbalah sadam and zrika. So from avoda to avoda, if you have kavana by the zrika sadam, we assume you also had kavana by the shchita. So he holds that it's asur no matter what. And also v'alfin and chutz mifnim. We also learn out from the pnim, from inside the Beis HaMikdash, even to outside the Beis HaMikdash, that your kavana travels, and therefore he held that it was usher to use these animals. However, Reb Shimon ben Lakish Amar Muteres. So now we have Reb Shimon ben Lakish against himself. A few lines ago, Rav Shimon ben Lakish would have fallen into the camp of either Rav Meir or the Chachamim, that the animal is rov or either miyud for Avodah Zara, whatever the case may be, by Shchita. Over here, we see not that way. So Amar Le, Rav Shimon ben Lakish says back to Rav Shimon bar El Yakim, and we'll close with this idea. Tar minach shah. What does tar minach shah mean? I don't think we've ever seen this phrase. Anyone remember this phrase? I don't think we've ever seen it. Says the Gemara, tar minach shah, Rashi says, second of the last short lines, Yarum mazalcha. May your mazel be exalted and raised, meaning great job. Why? Be'omer bigmar zvicha hu ovda. It depends what your kavana was. If what you're saying is that at the gemar zvicha, right by the shchita, then the whole animal is going to be puzzle. But if the shchita was done without that kavana, and you're only waiting to do the zrika, that's the avodah of the avodah askochavim. That's when he says that it's mutter, and that's how we solve for the stira. We'll stop right here at the 2 dots, about 10, 12 lines from the bottom of Lamed Daled and Beis, and pick up again tomorrow night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.